Good morning. Hemshech Ayin Beis, volume 3, the middle of page 1230. So, the middle of the paragraph. Actually, we finished the paragraph. The middle paragraph on page 1230. You could find the pages at ayinbeis.com. So after explaining the three general stages of emotional and cognitive development, the neshama lekis, as a person grows in their Aveda from the behavioral to the emotional to the cognitive, he said, "Kashem shu b'neshama lekis, kamoy keinu b'chinas zah lamayla." That zah lamayla, just like it's in the neshama lekis, which means the neshama as it comes down below, in zah. That Zoh grows through three stages, Mut v'murgish muskel. First comes the Ibur of Zoh, the level of Ibur, which is a state of pregnancy. And then it's Betachas HaKatnus, as he says, which means it's the lowest state of development, or you could say in the most minimalistic form, or not developed yet. And that's like in the pregnant, well, just like a child in pregnancy, the mind and the emotions are all recoiled into the fetal position, which is in the legs. So here too, the first stage of Ibur of Zah, Ibur, is a state of Nihi, mostly behavioral. Emotions and intellect have not developed a form that you can really call them expressive. They're there, but in a minimalistic way. And nevertheless, it's still called Hagdalah. It's still a form of growth, because during pregnancy, even by a fetus, it's growing. It's not in a static state. The Klolis Inyan, Bin Nachemer, Bin Natsura, the general structure, the development of the structure of the matter and of the spirit, in the case of a child, or the physical body and its faculties and the surah that will define the personality of the child, which Lamaila and Zah is Eris and Kalim, is Dafke Be'esa Ibn. That's when the main development really takes place, the most primary development, because it's going to establish, as we actually learned earlier, that how you plant the seed determines everything else will grow from there. If you remember, that was on page, where did he say that very clearly? I think on page 1222. After he talked about the Tmimus, it was about the Tmimus. I'm trying to find the page where he spoke about it, because I think it's very much connected to this. Oh, no, I'm sorry, page 1226. 1226. So it becomes the foundation. Okay. So the Ibur is a state of growth, but it's still obviously in its early stages. But the most important, but it's fundamental to the whole development, what happens in that early stage. So we talk about Zoh Be'esa Ibur Dafke. And what is the process and what is the so-called avodah of this? So he says, that then at that point, the most important thing is bechinas habitl, bitl hayesh ba'keli, shetiyah miyesh la'ayin. You need the bitl, you need that the keli should be receptive to the oir. That allows it to be connected with the oir and keli in the healthiest and most seamless fashion. Okay. Then he went and explained, what is this in Aveda? That's in Zman HaGolus. This is the stage Zman HaGolus when we don't have the Giluyim, the revelations of intellect and emotions. It's like a state of sleep, which means the Meichen and the Midas are in a state of Siluk HaMeichen, Va'atzmus HaMidas, And the only thing that remains is mostly the actionable, the functional, the behavioral elements. It's utterly concealed. And that's why Bizman HaGolus, the Ikar Aveda, is Bitla Yesh. Basically, training and refining the Kalim, that they should be sublimated, Birur HaKalim va'bitl shalahem, sublimated to be roi, they should be like empty, receptive to the divine energy. And that Aveda is primarily b'maisa b'peil mamsh, an action. But that doesn't mean it's just, that it's a passive state. It's b'ribu Aveda v'yagia, b'kamen nisyenus. It comes with a lot, ribu yagia. Ribu Aveda yagia, much work and effort. Same thing in Torah, mitzvah, in Torah, yagia seder b'chemer b'levenim. In bricks and mortar, as we said, kal v'chemer and libun hilchasa. Here you could also say yagia seder, but it's in limud Torah. Through all this comes the tikkun hakelim, and as the kelim are prepared, are primed and refined, the kelim dagili of la'asid, when Mashiach comes, that you'll have the revelation of the divine glory that even the flesh itself will also experience it, will also see it. So all this is ibur, a state of ibur, of zah. It's Naveda's man hagolas, primarily the bitl of nehi, to receive the higher levels. Then comes, he says, Agdolas Azah, comes Yanika and Moichin, doesn't elaborate on Yanika and Moichin, cites the Eitz Chaim, that Yanika, the Vav Ksav is the 6 emotions, they alone get developed. So though there's the Moichin in there, but it's primarily V'sham Shagam B'zeh Yesh Meichin, Aklagab Hashlem Zazah, B'chinas Vav Ksav is Levad, emotions. And after the Yanika comes the growth in Moichin. He says the Murgish Shemitzad HaMoichin. Like we said, the Murgish, that it's a level of Murgish, but it's a level of but it's Moichin are now in play. And that's the ages that he said 6 and 9. I'm not sure why he adds 9, but it must be in halacha some level. But he calls Ozman Achinuch, the time of education, as we learned, till age 13, when the Moichin gets complete in the level of Muskel. And as I suggested in the last time we learned, was that this does not mean Moichin, the Gadlus, this is more Chetzenius HaMoichin, most likely, because you're talking about Bar Mitzvah. We're not yet talking about Moichin that goes to the level where he said Neshama, where you're able to think about godliness as it's completely removed from existence, as we learned in the previous pages. But Chetzenius HaMoichin is also called Moichin, but it's the Murgish Mitzad HaMoichin. So you have to say that there's a higher level in that itself, and that comes at age 13. Why it doesn't go further? I think because what we're going to learn next, it's going to now take this to the next level. So that's a summary of what we learned, just to refresh our memories. If anybody wants to ask anything, I'm happy to answer. And if not, we'll just go to the next page, to the next paragraph on page 1230. So now Vihini Yudua, the next paragraph. Now it's known. Now Yudua, it's known. She has Gadlus Imma, the Gadlus Abba. In Moichin itself, Imma, we know the mother is Bina, Abba is Chochmah. That there's the concept of Gadlus Imma, the growth of Bina, of the mother, and Gadlus Abba, the growth of Chochmah, the father. So now you see immediately he's moving from emotions. We've already moved from emotions to Moichin when he spoke about the Moichin that's not Shaykh to Midas in the previous Moichin at the top of the page and last page. What he called, and there the Midas are Sichlim, they come naturally, but their focus is not on the emotions, it's on the experience of godliness that's beyond us, as we learned earlier. But now he's going into a new level of God, a new stage of discussing growth, since this is all about development and growth. So he says there's Gadlus Imma and Gadlus Abba. Now, what does that mean? The Gadlus Imma, the growth of Imma, Bina, mother, who she'esa hagdola. Let me just explain why Chachma and Bina like father and mother. Let's start even from the point of conception. Chachma is a nekuda, a spark, similar to the tipas moyach ha'av, the seed, which is only a very concentrated seed. Bina is the expansion of Chachma. So when that seed fertilizes an egg and it begins to develop, that development is compared to the mother. That's where it expresses and expands itself. So in a way, you could say the seed is like Chachma and the egg, the ovary is like the mother. But if you broaden it, sometimes we call it even a state of Ibur. In one sikh, I remember the Rabbi edited and said that though sometimes it says that Bina is later the birth, but first it's in a stage of pregnancy, then it becomes the birth. So that's one of the explanations. Another key point to remember with Abba ve'Imma, why Chachma and Bina, because as far as the rest of the structure of Atzilus, Zah are called the children, the Midas. Say, Eim habonim smecha. The father and the mother give birth next. What's the next stage? The birth of emotions. From Chesed through Malchus, through Yesod, but then Malchus as well. So in a way, you'd say that the Abba ve'Imma is Chachma and Bina. The mind, the father and the mother of the mind, Chachma and Bina, the spark and the expansion and the development, the comprehension, gives birth to the Midas. That's just a short explanation of why we call it Abba ve'Imma. But going back to this, so what Gadlus Immahu? She'esa Gdola v'Yisrachvus b'Hamidus. Gadlus Imma is when the mind comprehends something. What is the result of that? It causes and creates a growth and expansion in the emotions. In the amount of the abundance, the growth of the oir, of the energy and the vitality within them. Commission is barely ill, as was explained before. I just want to see where that is. Yeah, on page 1229, when he spoke about, just looking for the right words, that when a person contemplates on something, and the more you concentrate and the more you focus and understand it, the more it's going to impact emotions. Levushe asoger, right. I'm looking if he also said it by Primus Mech. Even better, on page 1228, when he says, where he speaks about how contemplation brings out a level of emotional growth. Okay. Nevertheless, he continues. So even though, yes, it's true, the more you concentrate, the more you focus on and contemplate and understand something, it develops and grows your emotions. And just for contrast purposes, when a newborn has emotions, they're still very underdeveloped. As the mind grows, and the more the understanding of it and appreciation of something, the emotions also grow in that sense. When I say grow, meaning they're not purely behavioral and reflexive, they become, let's call it, intelligently guided emotions. However, this doesn't mean you can change your emotions. If you remember, a big part of the discussion earlier was, I'm going back to page on page 1225, and then on 1227, he said, I'm sorry, Mutva, murgesh, is when the seichel is directing the emotions, but the emotions are still the natural emotions that were either within you, the ones you were born with, or even if it's emotions that are generated by intelligence, they're still moichin hashayich lemidus, because the purpose is to get the emotions going. So when a person, for example, contemplates ungodliness through the eyes of existence, through the lens of existence, those emotions are that contemplation is still connected to the emotions of the person. And therefore, it's still aligned. If you remember on the parentheses on page 1229, it's still what he called, at the end of the parentheses, he said, Amidas hein kitul dasan. The emotions are still the way, in other words, if you contemplate ungodliness and you're, let's say, like Shammai, those emotions will be more like in a gvuradik way. Yira, if it was like Hillel, it'll be more chesed way. So the emotions are still the natural emotions, but they become much more mature. They're not just about reflexive, and they're not just instinctive or impulsive based on your natural wiring. So that's what he's going to say. As much as bina and the contemplation a person has makes the emotions grow and mature, but they don't change in their fundamental nature. The emotions remain as they were in their core state of when they were ingrained and wired within us. So in other words, he's leading now to another level of moichin that actually can change our emotions. We haven't learned that yet. It was made mention of on the top of page 1225, but he just said kamosh isbar, as will be explained, and now he's going to explain that. So we're coming now to another stage of emotional and cognitive development where the mind has the power not just to lift emotions, primis hamoichin, to a mind level where it experiences something on a higher state, not just on a subjective state, but actually changing the emotions. So he's going to continue this now, explaining this further. And furthermore, also when we're talking about the mature mind, the maturity of the mind, because remember we spoke earlier that you could also have the mind that's not directed by the natural inclinations of the person. When we talked about hu chayecha, that God is your sustenance and your father, there the contemplation was to be aware that he's your father. So it's really your natural love of a child to a father, the natural love of all of us to our life, the source of our life sustenance. So you just have to stimulate that. And as he said, it's an easy stimulation because you already have it ingrained in you. But there's also a contemplation that's not about you. That's not about your natural instincts. And that's what he's addressing now. He's saying also that contemplation, also the maturity, the mature mind, that that don't have mixed into it the natural feelings. If you remember when he spoke, I just want to go back. He said that he said the word taruva satva earlier too. I think it was. Where did he say that? Was that in Kuntus Aveda or in Ayin Beis? When he said both things, that even though we have natural inclinations, we also have the mind at work, and there's a mix. Both factors are relevant to get those emotions going. Does anyone remember where that was? Oh, here it is. I'm sorry. Yeah, on page 1229, I'm just reading the line, the middle, the line that begins, B'chol ha'anhaga. He says, so even when the love is coming from the mind, not just from the natural inclinations of the individual, of the soul, nevertheless has a mixed into that, a mixture. You also have tav advar shemispol gamitzad hamida. So he's addressing, so even that Moichin the Gadlus, that does not have this mix of anything natural. In other words, it's completely coming from the mind. And that's a level where the awakening or the arousal of the emotion is only due to the intelligence, seichel, and the comprehension, asaga. So even that, he says, fine. You've removed, the mind is now objectively coming to an understanding that godliness is an entity that one should want to connect with and love. And so therefore it's coming from seichel, not because of the natural need for God, because of like our life sustenance or our father. So even that, he says, it's true, it's coming from seichel, but it doesn't change the person's emotions. It's above them, but it doesn't change them. In other words, the human personality of this, the personality of this particular neshama, even when it's on that level of Meichen the Gadlus, it doesn't change, or you could say in different, better translated, that the natural inclination, the natural wiring of this neshama is not misbatelus. It's not eliminated. Whether you're bypassing it or you're directing it or guiding it, but you haven't changed it. You've reached a level of maturity. It's not been changed. So if a person is a naturally more chesed person, they remain a more chesed person. Like we learned the 7 branches of the Menorah back in the beginning of this subject discussion on page 1225, when he said that Hava v'yira, every neshama has its own particular personality. V'zeh bebeis inyanim. Let me stop for a moment. Anybody wants to ask anything on what we learned now? So now he continues. V'zeh bebeis inyanim. And this process is expressed in 2 things. He's going to break this down into 2 ideas now. Ha'aleph, ha'echad, shamidas einem mishtanim, mikamoy shein beteva betildasan. That even when you're in this mature level, where the mind is completely in control, and a person is not an immature person where emotions are guiding them. The mind is in control. Nevertheless, the first point is the midas do not change from a kamoy shein beteva betildasan, from the way they were, from the way they are in their natural structure from birth. In bizgabrus hachesed, whether they are where chesed dominates or is stronger, or bizgabrus midas hagvura, or another personality, emotional personality type would be someone where the midas hagvura dominates, discipline, restraint. So that's not changed. As we actually can see, palpably see, also with an adult and an elderly person, that he doesn't change in his very nature. The same nature he had when he was 20, he has when he's 50. I'm just throwing those ages out. Or when he's 80. The emotional structure of the person is a person's a Baal Chesed when they were 20, they're a Baal Chesed when they're 50 and when they're 80. I'm talking about from the emotional, not the behavioral. So that does not change. Shim hu. Looks like missing a word. So they say the word is ish. She'imu ish chesed. If he's a person of kindness, a kind person, lo ish agvura. He's not going to become suddenly a more severe person. And so also vice versa. In other words, if he's a ish gvura, he doesn't become a ish chesed with the years, no matter how much he matures. And on the contrary, The Meshech Hashonim, over the years, Hari Hamidus Nasim B'Teikav is Gabrus Mitzad HaTeva. The midas actually becomes stronger and more intense and stronger due to the natural, from the natural perspective. In other words, the younger you are, the chesed is less developed. The older you are, your personality becomes more expressive and more expanded. Ukamoi, remember the analogy we've been using is like a tree. The emotions are like a growing tree, a growing plant. Ukamoi ha'ilon, like we see with the tree. In the beginning, the tree in its earlier stages, it's narrow, it's thin, and then it continues to grow and get thicker. It's a natural growth. The kamoi kein hu ba'adam, and similarly is by a person, shenim shel eitz hasada, that's compared to a tree in the field. So just like a person grows, this doesn't mean that everybody becomes fatter. That's not what he's saying. It just means there's a growth, a natural growth. Now, obviously, you could ask the question, what do you mean? A tree is physically growing. A human being doesn't physically grow. I'm not talking about weight, but height or the human structure till around whatever, age 20, age 21, when we stop growing. But the comparison here is not to the body of the person. The body stops growing. You don't get higher, taller. And you're staying, that was your structure. When you're a baby, everything is miniature. When you're a full-grown adult, everything is in its it reaches its peak. But we're talking here about the emotions of the person. The emotions are compared to this tree, so the emotions grow and expand. I also would add, even though he doesn't say it, but the same idea is also what type of tree. If it's an apple tree, it's not going to become an orange tree over the years. Going back to the point that the emotions remain the same. You don't change, even when one person grows and is more mature. The gamma seichel, he adds now, and also the intelligence, it also creates a stronger midah. Remember, his Gadlus Amida doesn't mean more stubborn. It means his Gadlus Amida means that the midah becomes more developed. So when a person, let's say, is naturally a kind person, so their midah will go that far. But if their seichel also comes into play and makes a compelling case, I'm using the example of chesed, that it should be this way. So your mind is now also not just approving, but making a strong case that this person should be given chesed. The emotion will be more intense. So even though the person has it naturally, but when you're really convinced and your mind tells you that this is the right thing to do, so you're not going to have that doubt, maybe I'm just doing it because I have a soft heart or because I can't say no. The midah is going to become far more intense because the seichel has also made a case for it. Again, a word missing, like we see. The misha daite kala, someone who's das, his mind. He's using the word das, but das means maybe the concentration, the focus, the attachment to the idea. Kala, his expression means it's weaker. Harihu mishtana b'midesav, v'ritzenesav, the next page, 1231. His emotions and his desires change. So when a person's mind is not in full force, or they have a weaker mind, or they're not that so what do I want to say? Their mind is not that dominant in them, so they could be more wishy-washy. Basically, they're more what's the word I want to say? More, they fluctuate in their midas and their ritzenesav. And a person like that is very susceptible, and you could affect him kach v'kach for this opinion or that opinion. In other words, you could change his mind easier, and therefore his emotions. Mashenke mishu begadlus amechin, In contrast, someone who's a very mature and very strong mind, he will not change his desires just so quickly. He doesn't say quickly because he's far more developed. He far more come to a very strong position. The mind has convinced him that this is right. So someone whose mind is not so much at work. So the emotions are there, but you could also not change the emotional character of the person, but change where he should direct his emotion.
The expression of the emotions.
Right, the expression of the emotions. But someone who has a stronger or more mature mind, a more powerful mind, will not change his desires. The masha seichel mechayev hu betekev. Because that which the seichel compels you to, when your seichel has come to understand it that way, it makes it far more steadfast, far more unwavering. So all this is still coming to explain the first point, that in this state, as much as the mind is powerful, the emotions don't change. Because we see that a person's emotional structure remains the same, but on the contrary, it gets stronger. And especially with seichel, it makes the person more committed and more steadfast in his emotional decisions, so to speak. Raksha begadlus. So then what's the difference between a gadol and a katan? Or gadlus hamechen and katnus hamechen? If it doesn't change the emotions, what's the difference? Raksha begadlus hu bedvarim gdelim yeser. In a person, a more mature person, the things that he is drawn to are more superior things. I'm sorry. I didn't say it the right way. So that's number one. We learned this also before, if you remember. As the mind grows, it also, the objectives, you're not interested in playing little games with toys. Hopefully. You're interested in more mature experience, more mature activities, reading a book, an intelligent idea, whatever it may be. He said this just for context. This was stated page 1223. He spoke the differences. He said three things then. It's relevant here. One is that a more mature mind, the dvarim, the things you pursue are more mature. Number two, the emotions are more refined. They're not as crass or raw. And number three, if I recall correctly, look at what was the third thing. I don't remember right now, but there was a third thing. I think the thing may be that the seichel guides it, that you don't just follow the emotion. Well, those two things for sure. The number one, that the midah is in more mature matters. And number two, it's more refined. I think the third was that it doesn't just follow impulse. The mind guides it. That was the third thing, yeah. So he's going to say like this now. So the difference is that in Gadlus, the dvarim gdelim yeser. The gam, additionally, another thing Gadlus does, that when you're more mature, the mind is more mature, the midas and the desires, the natural impulses and inclinations and desires of the person are not as crass, as they are only due to their natural impulsive inclinations. Because when they're the more natural state and the mind is not developed yet, they're more chumrius. He says in Yiddish, be'etzem grab, be'etzem grab. They're fundamentally, grub means thick, but grub also means more crass. You say grub. So the more the mind matures, the more it refines the emotions, that they should be directed toward things that are not, the more refined, not just that you're pursuing more lofty matters, but the midas themselves become more refined. When the midas, on the other hand, that's the natural emotions. So naturally, a person, for example, is hungry. So how do we eat? If you don't think too much, you can eat in a very grub way. When a person has a more mature mind, I'm giving a very basic example. Their very way of eating, the way of filling their needs, is not going to be as indulgent. So when the seichel is in control, the midas be'etzem musum, their very personality is in a more refined way. It's still not changed. The personality character hasn't changed of the midas, but they're more refined. And here's the third thing. V'gam, and the third thing, gam, additionally, yesh b'em hagbola. A mature mind causes the emotions to have some restraint. Sha'seichel magbilas hamida, the seichel limits and restrains the emotion at kama tispashit, how far it should go. So a little child can have a tantrum. Something bothers them, they'll just start crying or yelling or whatever. A mature person, even if something bothers them, they may react, but it's going to be very measured and very much deliberate. Like a person may say, what you just did is inappropriate, but it's not going to be an uncontrolled emotion. So he said three things about what Gadlus does, and they're all not changing the emotion. One is that the activities the person pursues are going to be more lofty ones. The very emotions will be more refined, and finally they'll be more restrained. But even with all this maturity, they don't fundamentally change the emotions. Just as they were in a state of chesed, in their core wiring or the core inherent intrinsic emotions, Keinu begadlus ubezikna. That's still, that chesed is the same personality also as in maturity and even in bezikna, even in older age. Ukamay Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. Okay, now he's bringing Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. The two schools of thought, the house of Shammai, the house of Hillel. Hillel was from Gvura, Shammai Hillel from Chesed, Shammai from Gvura. They came from Chesed and Gvura. Harigam b'teira ubechol darkei avidosam. So it wasn't just their personality, also their Torah, their method of learning Torah, and all the darkei avidosam, all their different paths of Aveda. Hoye b'bchinas Chesed Gvura were also delineated and defined by their Chesed and Gvura. The Beis Shammai Eisrim, we see Beis Shammai forbids. Eisrim means they find Eisrim that it's prohibit. And Beis Hillel Matirin, and Beis Hillel in most cases say it's permissible. Beis Shammai says it's not permissible. Beis Hillel says it's permissible. They say Chesed and Gvura. Chesed is heter, more lenient. Gvura is more stringent. He's going to give an example. So there's a machlekes between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. Ketzad meragdim lifnei hakala. The mitzvah is that you're supposed to dance and bring simcha to a kala, to a bride at a wedding. So Beis Shammai says, when you sing, you say kala noah v'chasuda. You say this kala is beautiful and kind. And Beis Hillel says, is it the other way around? I'm sorry, I think it's the other way around. No, I think it's the other way around. Beis Shammai says, Beis Hillel says, Kala Noam Chasuda. And Beis Shammai say, Kamoishu, you don't have to give any, you don't have to make any compliments. You could just describe her as she is. So what is the basis of their machlekes? So he says, could you do be in case of Menagdim da plukta shalahem? Their disagreement is be'efen aveda, in the type of aveda. Do you so-called support the person and make them feel even better? Or do you leave them be? You still dance and still celebrate with them, but you give them more, you put the responsibility more on them than on you. So Hillel, like with the story with the ger, the potential ger wanted to convert, Shammai sent him away. You can't teach a person the whole Torah standing on one foot. And Hillel did teach him. So Hillel's approach is generally more chesidic. So he's giving this example. Why this example and why here, I'm not sure, but the point is that you see their chesed and gvura was not just when they were not just their natural inclination, it affected their Torah opinion and their behavior. Like it says elsewhere about Shamenu. Hari de megedel ve'etzem hasoga hagdela shelahem v'teira v'aveda lo yaya ashini ve'etzem hamidus. From the greatness and the intensity of their great understanding in Torah and Aveda, you see there was no shinui. Ve'etzem hamidus. Their midas, their fundamental midas didn't change. Even when they're applying it to Torah ideas and to a behavior, I think because he wants to bring darkei avodah, that's why. All the disagreement in Shammai and Hill is not about their behavior. It's not about something and how to act. It's more about their different theories. It could be the case of Meragdim comes down to a real act, that you behave in a different way. And yet, the etzem midas, there's no shin in the etzem midas, like you said before. That intelligence actually intensifies each of these emotions. They're on a higher level, b'mayla in a higher quality and a higher level. So that's point number one. When he said ha'alef Beis back on the last page, we're talking about that. As much as the mature mind, it grows and becomes so powerful, it does not change the very emotions of that are embedded or ingrained in the individual. And on the contrary, the more the moichin get greater, they intensify it. But then he said there were two things. What's the second thing? It goes now, v'habeis. V'hadereis the bechlolus einem yetzim levushi hatfa. The second thing that maturity does not achieve is that not just that the midas don't change, but they're not even subject to change. They don't go out of the garment of their natural means. In other words, they stay in their orbit. Let's see what he explains. V'hainu, shebegadlus hasaga, that even when you come to approach of Gadlus hasaga, great understanding and great maturity, einoi yetzem me'inyan hatva, it doesn't, the midas don't go away from natural structures. And it still has a relationship with the natural order. Let me explain and then we'll read further. What he's saying, what he's adding here, is the first thing was they don't change. Chesed doesn't become gvura. Gvura doesn't become chesed. No matter how much you mature, no matter how old the person is. But there's another thing, that the midas are they are always bound to nature. It's like saying an apple will never become an orange. A leopard will not become a lion. Midas, not only don't they change from one to the other, they just never change. They always remain subject to the laws of nature. And nature doesn't change. That's what I believe he's saying here. I think it's a deeper point, because if you remember when we spoke about midas and moichin by nature, maybe the word nature is not, but moichin are natural transcenders. a healthy mind that's not meshuchet, that's not biased or prejudiced, is always going to look for the objective truth. And if it's something that's beyond us and out of our comfort zone, a mind will accept that. That's why a mind can dream, can imagine. Midas, besides the fact that midas don't change from chesed to gvura, they are not capable of changing from becoming subjective to objective. They are bound always by a natural subjectivity. They're always bound by the laws of nature. In other words, your mind can imagine things that are beyond nature. The emotions cannot, because they don't imagine, they experience. And their experience is one that is about a natural structure. Like he's giving an example. Like we see it in the revelations from above. Yesh nisim nistarim v'nisim niglim. There are concealed miracles and there are revealed miracles. The nisim nistarim, concealed miracles, hu amalim bashim b'darkei hateva. They are enclosed and manifest in the ways, in the laws of nature. I'm trying to figure what it means by the next line. Okay. So even miracles that are concealed in nature, he says, where the nature, since it's a miracle, it means it's suspending the natural order, but he's going to explain, but the nature doesn't change. That's why it's a concealed miracle. So for example, the miracle of Purim, that's considered a concealed miracle. It was a definite miracle. God maneuvered and made sure that the miracle would take place. And therefore, if it was not up to God's hand, God forbid, the Jews may have been killed. But he created a situation, a choreography, where everybody was in the right place at the right time. Esther, Mordechai, Haman, etc. So the miracle was there, and it definitely was not natural. But still, nature was not suspended in any overt way. It was all behind the scenes. That's what he's going to say. Where a nes nigla, like let's say the parting of the sea, no, that was not. Their nature is completely suspended. So he's going to say this example that even emotions that are guided by a mature mind, and they're directed toward very refined things. You're loving God. We're not talking about someone who's doing whatever they want. He says even that is still does not go outside of the natural order. And then we're going to talk about a level that does go outside of the natural order. So that's what he's going to say right now. So let me just read it inside. So like the nisim nistarim, they're manifest in the laws of nature. Here too, teva has been suspended, but suspended, as you're going to say in a moment. I'm not sure what this is referring to. Maybe somebody knows. It's a story, I think, of the Gemara or something.
This is in Sefer Daniel, when Nebuchadnezzar had a dream and he was very overwhelmed. Nobody was able to tell him what it means. And then Daniel told him that the Eibishter is showing him cannot be a Ovid B'chayil. The way that he wants, he's doing it with a full takeoff.
Okay, so Shagam Ba'ateva who could say is Baruch. So basically, he's not overriding him, but he's showing him that even in the things as they're working in the natural order, it's going to be the way I want it, the way God wants it. That's what you're saying, right? Correct? Yeah. Good. Shukayach. And welcome, Rabbi Shleimer. Hear your voice.
Shokayach. Welcome you. We want to hear what you have to say.
But so let me the gam needed is there, and we also see in this Gili Elikus. So not only we see God's hand, but we also see Gili Elikus. That all the subjects on all the Afsiyaretz, all those on earth, the dwellers, saw Yeshua Salakenu, the salvation from God, God's salvation. And that's why it's called a miracle, coming from the word nes, orim nisi, like a flag. Shuloshan remumus. It rises above, it elevates. Vigili, hainu bezelikus, that godliness is revealed through this. And look earlier, the first Bereshis he says in volume 2, in Ayin Beis volume 2, nevertheless, Teva did not completely suspend nature. The suspension was within nature. In other words, it controlled nature, but it didn't change the nature. The Nisim Niglim and revealed miracles, that it completely suspends nature. The classic example is Kriyas Yamsuf. It's not like, God could have, for example, let the Jews walk through the water, and it shouldn't hurt them. So that would be more concealed, because the water remained water, and God worked his ways that the Jews were able to walk through water. The truth is that's also a suspension, but no, here, water is subject to gravity, and that's why the water is on the earth, on land, and suddenly the water stood up like two walls, and they walked through it. So that's much more revealed. The actual law of nature was suspended. It's not God hand working through nature, it's suspending them. The same thing here, the bebchinas Gadlus Abba. I don't know why they said Gadlus Abba below. Why not Gadlus Imma? I think just bebchinas Gadlus. I think a mistake, this footnote. Because before the Rebbe Rashab said Gadlus. He didn't say Gadlus Abba or Imma. That bebchinas Gadlus Hameichin Shalamayla Mi'in Atfa Legamri. Okay, but he didn't explain. So in other words, the second point is that when you don't have God, the second point is even with Gadlus, you could have the nature doesn't change, even though the emotions are on a far higher level. And then there's a point where you actually can change emotions. But he didn't explain this yet. So there we have it. You have the two different approach, the two points in Hatfa. And now we understand there's a possibility now going to a higher level where you actually change the midas. I have to apologize because I have right now an interview I must do. And so if any questions or further explanation, we'll just continue on Sunday. And I'll give you a report then of my trip and so on. So I'm going to have to stop here. So everybody have a good Shabbos and be well.
Thank you, Rabbi. Shabbos, welcome back.
Thank you. And the end of so we're stopping at the end of the paragraph on page 1231. Sunday, we'll do it full version and we'll take questions and we'll discuss this more in detail, okay?
Thank you, Rabbi. Get some rest.